What's up, parish orphans and retrogrades? Happy Thursday. What a day it is today here in now middle September, the year of our Lord 2021. I hope you're well, my parish orphans and retrogrades. Today, I want to talk to you about something rather important. It's of a piece with the things that I've been saying recently, and it goes like this. There's a present, or at the very latest, a soon coming schism in the church. This happens about every 500 years, from Nicaea around the 500s to the great schism in 1054 to Luther. He did Schism Plus in 1517 to now. We have schismatics all over the place, in this case on the right side of the church, that meaning right versus left. And the schism is, I think it's basically safe to say, underway now. I have lots of sort of secret background info that's not fully vetted, that's probably true, that's at the very least mostly true or mostly vetted. So I can tell you the schism is underway, and I have been, among all of my friends on the Catholic right, a voice, among others, like Church Militant or Patrick Coffin, Michael Lofton, Steve Skojec has stood for this, a voice trying to hold the line. Here's the thing. The schism, as it seems to be happening all around us, the floodgates giving way to the flood, is unlike any other schism that's happened. Schisms happen about once every 500 years. In this case, even though you've heard me condemning some of the rad-trads and the far-right people that are being short-sighted, that are being myopic in their schismatism, I don't blame them. They are unique among all of those in church history who ever fallen on the side of schism. And here's how. The schism is, insofar as it's about to happen, and it's happening, at least 90% the fault of Pope Francis. At least 90%. That is very conservative. If not 95%, if not 98%. Pope Francis. And one thing that among the other, I don't know, moderate far-right Catholics, or sometimes we are called post-trads, like Skojec, Vors and Church Militant, Coffin, Michael Lofton, there are others there. All the off-channel convos that I have, the times are confusing enough because Pope Francis pledged in 2013 to make a mess. He pledged to make a mess, and he has. That there is literally no one with whom I agree on everything. Now, I mentioned some guys that are really close to my position. The rad-trads are, somewhat close to my position, but distancing themselves fast, right? Because they've been changing over the last 2 years, really heading towards schism. But I don't blame them nearly, and I mean nearly as much as any of the people who have ever waged schism on Holy Mother Church in the history of the church. In this sense, Francis is a new moment. He's the worst pope yet, and he is sui generis. And here's the thing also. I'm going to be saying lots that might surprise you today. So stay tuned in. I would say that the trads, and I'd include myself as a trad still, it depends kind of what type of trad you're talking about. Trads, mostly aside from me, tend to undercover, meaning underexpose, underemphasize Pope Francis I. This is not the story among like left Caths or centrist Caths. The trads talk, I'd say, about Vatican II 40 times more than they talk about Pope Francis, right? The trads who are ever striving to be edgelord, it's a game of one-upmanship among Catholic traditionalists to be edgy. They understand that sort of secular conservatives and normie right-wing Catholics alike both acknowledge that Francis is a new ultra-left moment in the Catholic pontificate. And so they tend to underemphasize what Francis does. They like to stick to what separates them, the trads. And so they cover Vatican II, and they cover it in ever increasing stark light. So, and of course, the left Caths and the moderate Caths don't cover Francis much at all. So this means that Francis is actually underexposed, undercovered, and underemphasized, even though this goes absolutely against the prevailing narrative that Francis has been overcovered. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I'll prove this to you in the course of today's show. Here's how I'll do it. I'm going to go through the red letter moments, the big, bold print of Pope Francis's 10, I'm going to call them interviews with Eugenio Scalfari, atheist, socialist, founder of La Repubblica. Free rag they would shove in your face, print rag they would shove in your face on the metro in Rome. I hated it then. I always wanted to punch those guys because they were really pushy with it. And I didn't even know who Scalfari was in 2007 when I was there in Rome. But here's the key, okay? To me saying, look, some of the rad trads, I would say all of the ones that are pushing towards schism, with some insider info too, I can really confidently assert that they have pushed towards schism. But they're unlike the other schismatics insofar as we have never before had a pope that coaxed right-wingers in the Catholic Church towards schism, that invited schism, that has used every apparatus at his disposal, particularly these crypto real / fake, but real interviews with Eugenio Scalfari are the main tell to his pontificate. And I've done the legwork of going through all of these interviews, and I'm going to go and I'm going to reshare some stuff with you today that'll surprise even you, the red-pilled Catholic traditionalist or whatever. So this is greatly exculpating to some extent of these Catholic rad traditionalists that I critique. I say, look, don't be myopic. Stay on board the bark. Don't leave the bark. Don't do something wacky. Don't create a little cultus. Don't create some breakaway sect. Don't do anything like that. Stay put. Hold the line. But I realized that in my coverage of Pope Francis has really waned over the summer. So what I did is I put together all the interviews with Eugenio Scalfari with a heavy dose of help from a couple main articles at 1 Peter 5 that I had to go and find. And I'm going to show you how hardcore Francis's program has been to push the right-wingers in the church, the ones who let's face it, really love the church, even the rad trads, inclusive of the rad trads. His goal has been to push them out the other side of the church so that the only faithful in the church fall out the right-hand side of the bark. So that all you have left are these tepid centrists and leftists in the church that don't care and they're not really Catholic. I think that's the goal. Now, a conversation that ongoingly I've had with, I told you, the guys that are closest to where I'm at are still different. In normal conditions, under, church circumstances, churched circumstances for 2,000 years, the people that you're closest to in terms of your viewpoint on ecclesiology and Catholic theology and philosophy in the church are almost right there with you. But times are so novel. Circumstances of Francis's 266th pontificate are so novel that even the people I'm closest with, I have some not sizable, but prominent distinctions. So Michael Lofton and I were talking about this off channel. And I was saying, he's raising a bunch of good points, but I was saying, look, I don't think Francis is yet a formal heretic, but his whole trick is to avoid formal heresy. Why? Because, and again, this is my point of view. He's an evil prelate. The Council of Trent says, obey even evil prelates. Okay? He's an evil prelate. He is the evil prelate. That's my view. Today will substantiate that some. And his whole trick is to not be a formal heretic and to use what is new in church circumstances, technology, mass communications, mass media, specifically social media, to be talking as a man, not from the office teaching, in a way that will make a bunch of faithful people lose their faith anyway. And that is what Lofton kept reminding me. Hey, he has not, that is to say, he has not become a formal heretic. And I said, okay, I'm not 100% sure, but I think you're right. So assume it for the sake of argument. Assume it, arguendo. Pope Francis, let's assume, is not a formal heretic. But what's he doing? He's kicking everyone out the backside, the right side of the bark by saying such awful things. And a lot of people, I'm not saying Lofton specifically, but a lot of folks, even on the Catholic right, even the rad-trads, have forgotten some of the things he said. And that's the whole trick. If he's doing what I think he's doing, it's an opinion. I'm not saying I'm 100% sure, but I'm quite sure. I'm 98% there. Then all he's doing is not, it doesn't involve formal heresy at all. What's the fixation with formal heresy? Well, he hasn't taught as a pontiff, as the Pontifex Maximus, formal heresy. Well, that's not the only way to mess people up. The real way to mess people up and to foment schism, different kinds of schism that have happened over the course of 21 ecumenical councils, is to just dispirit the faithful, good people, the faithful people that really do care about the church, but are hasty, are myopic, short-sighted, impetuous. Okay, so this still, all of these modifiers still attached to them, but we are all judged. The Lord ponders the heart on the basis of our intentions. And so if people do fly out the right side of the boat, I do believe that because Francis is sui generis, he's 1 in a million. He's 1 in 266. He's the worst. He's trying to do this. And remember what Jesus says about stumbling blocks. Francis has been a stumbling block, not for the left Catholics. They're already out the boat. Not for the centrist Catholics. They're already tepid. The Lord already spits them out of his mouth. But this is counter to all of our assumptions thus far. The stumbling block in number 266 pontificate has been for these little ones, the rad-trads, who are stumbling all over the place. And his fate, the stumbling block, not the people that stumble over it, will be worse than death. Will wish that he'd never been born. Now, I'm not saying he can't, repent. But I'm offering a perspective, here's what I'm saying, that's uniquely my own. Other people that haven't crossed into these murky waters yet, like my friend Michael Lofton, they tend to say, oh, well, there's not formal heresy, so it's not that big of a deal. No, it's a bigger deal in a way. Pope Francis knows the Holy Spirit protects the church against formal heresy out of his mouth or out of an ecumenical council's mouth. He understands what they've been trying since Vatican II. It didn't work at Vatican II. Look at the documents. This is what I've been saying for the last year and a half. It can't come out of his mouth either. So let's look at what happens when a pope says something informally on a plane presser, tweets something informally and says, hey, I'm not teaching, this is just me. Or more ambiguous still, gives an interview to this old atheist, nonagenarian, 97-year-old atheist, socialist editor of La Repubblica, Eugenio Scalfari, who takes notes in a way that, here, I want to repeat one thing before I jump into these, is considered old and a little outmoded, but legitimate. A legitimate form of journalism for Europeans. Scalfari is a European. The Vaticanista magazines that we all get our information downstream from are European. So, yes, Eugenio Scalfari, who's done at least 10 interviews with Francis. I'll talk later about why I can only say at least. As Steve Skojec said regularly on 1 Peter 5, no one knows what the number is because they talk so regularly. It's way more than 10. But I'm going to talk about 10 dates here today of either interviews or Scalfari's reproductions of unknown to that point snippets of earlier interviews. So that's what I'm saying. That's the essence. That's what I'm driving at. Is Scalfari's manner of interview is not an invalid form the way American media, center, left, and right, have all said, oh, this is an invalid form of an interview. Eugenio Scalfari doesn't take notes. He doesn't tape record. He doesn't even take shorthand, bro, they say. So it's an invalid form of journalism. That's in America, right? Americans need to learn to judge other cultures the way the cultures judge themselves. In Europe, it's seen as old, erstwhile, but still valid to execute, I should say, interviews this way. So it's a real form of an interview. It's a false flag. It's a bit of a psyop, especially for America center-left Catholic outfits to say, oh, this is bogus, even though Francis keeps going to Eugenio Scalfari and saying wacky things that are only partly, imperfectly remitted, retracted, redacted, whatever. That's a psyop. It's a valid form of interviewing in Europe. Okay? Imprecision is the watchword. Parish orphans and retrogrades. Imprecision is the watchword. And some of the things that Pope Francis has said is so much more shocking than that Pope John XII allegedly died in the arms of a female paramour lover. That's on him. That doesn't have much to do to scandalize the rest of the church. Some of the things Pope Francis has allegedly, unallegedly, partly retracted, partly unretracted, said to Eugenio Scalfari of La Repubblica are so shocking as to shock the conscience of all Christendom, not just Catholics. And you've forgotten a bunch of these things. First, I want to kick a shout out to my students. I'd like to tell everyone it's not too late to sign up for one of the classes on Retrograde Classical Academy. Go to timothyjgordon.com and click enroll. We got 7 classes, including Latin, which happens tonight, 3rd class in like an hour. You're not that far behind. This is like the last week or so you could really sign up. Also, click the like button, subscribe, leave a comment, please. Get notified when this show goes on. That's a good way to support the channel. The Case for Patriarchy is my book that, guess what, was supposed to be published October 1st, but they got their copies in early, and they, Sophia Institute Press, my publisher, are starting to send out copies now, today, this week. You'll get your copy earlier than the pub date. Pub date's October the 1st. You're going to get your copy in September. If you go and order it now, I won't even call it pre-ordering anymore. Order your copy now from Sophia Institute Press or order it from Amazon.com. Sophia Institute Press is the publisher, and The Case for Patriarchy is making big waves. I have tons of stories from behind the scenes of people that are shocked. In a credible way, they're shocked at the starkness of Christian teaching on men and women, particularly married men and women. The Case for Patriarchy. Buy that today. That's how you can support this show. You can also, of course, enroll in the university. You can also most directly support me, Timothy J. Gordon, through Patreon. Timothy J. Gordon, Patreon. Thanks a lot. Lots of attacks are coming. I'm saying stuff that no one else is out there saying. I have a particular piece of the American Catholic landscape insofar as I'm saying, look, Pope Francis is way worse than even the radtrads are saying in some distinct ways, not all. But stay the course. Don't go anywhere. And I'm trying to show you how. Also, if you're looking to get from a blue state to a red state, go to realestateforlife.org. And these good people, these pro-life, mostly Catholics, will help you get from the bluest of the blue to the reddest of the red. I moved from California to Mississippi, and my family's never been happier. Go to realestateforlife.org, and they will help you make this large headache smaller today. Get out, people, before the distinct possibility, not a guarantee, of state lines, state borders closing down, not letting people out or in. They're talking about this in real terms, behind the scenes. Get to a good place before you're trapped in a bad place. I'm serious. Not a guarantee this will happen, but it's really being batted around. Okay, so I'm saying here today, the radtrads who are breaking away, we're in the midst of a schism, are wrong, but they're less culpable, far less culpable than all other schismatics in the history of the church, because the Pope, number 266, has done something no Pope has ever done. He has used the apparati of social media, but the specific apparatus of Eugenio Scalfari to really beg them, anyone who's not super consanguine about this, anyone who doesn't have super long view of what to do, but does care passionately about the church, the way the Retrogrades do, will lose their footing at the behest of this stumbling block called Pope Francis. So Eugenio Scalfari he represents some of the worst outrages of the Francis pontificate. And yes, this is the case, even though he uses an older style of European interview. Other journalists use it. It's not only him in Europe. It's gone by the wayside mainly, but it is a valid interview style, just old and inaccurate in some ways. That doesn't mean that Pope Francis doesn't know this and isn't hiding in plain sight with it. Ross Douthat of the New York Times, who's a Catholic, said in the early to middle years of the Francis pontificate, he said, what Francis is doing with Scalfari is very intentional. This is why he's given at least 10 interviews. And it is a method of testing the wind, sticking his finger into the wind and seeing what the response will be. I will prove this to you now. Okay. So I went back through the first of these interviews. It's not I'm going to number these 1 through 10. A couple of them I don't have much at all on. But the first one in October of 2013, less than, 6 months, 6-month period of his pontificate. There are some incredibly interesting Easter eggs, some very fascinating, curious, fishy points that stick way out that no one covered at the time. Because even those of us who doubted Pope Francis, and I did then, and I thought this was curious then, I didn't know enough about who the man was, Bergoglio, Francis, to understand that he just dropped an Easter egg. Other aspects of what he says are incredibly obvious. Now, back when I first read this interview in October of 2013, interview number 1, I wish we had like numbers that flash at the screen. Number 1, he says that everyone should be called to seek out the good as they define it. Good and evil should be defined as per the subject. What Francis was doing here, and no one missed this, everyone was talking about it. This first interview was published by a Vatican website, then taken down, then published, then taken down, then published again, then taken down again. And it was also republished in L'Osservatore Romano, basically the second unofficial Vatican site. And Francis here, when he made this remark endorsing relativism, through the mouth of Eugenio Scalfari, so there's a little bit of plausible deniability, the way Ross Douthat talked about, he was giving the middle finger to Pope Benedict XVI, who had said that the most important problem in the world was moral relativism. In the first 6 months of his pontificate, he said that. Francis comes in and simultaneously he says the most important problem in the world today is youth unemployment and the lack of care for the elderly, right? Social conditions of poverty, like a Marxist. So that's a middle finger to Benedict, together with, as it couples with, a corollary statement that he made about good and evil. He expresses the very soul of relativism, saying everyone should define good and evil for themselves, and the conscience is sovereign. That's a middle finger to Benedict. He was flying that flag pretty high, and everyone caught it at the time. Now, here are 3 moments from that same first interview, October 2013. I've just been through the whole thing with a fine-tooth comb today. 3 moments from interview 1, and I'm not doing 4 points from each of these 10 interviews. This would be a 4-hour video. I'm not going to do that. But here are 3 moments you didn't catch at the time. He mentions by name his mentor, Cardinal Martini, the dawn of the Sankt Gallen Mafia. Julia Maloney's book is coming out in just a month. The dawn, Cardinal Martini, is mentioned by name. And he even insinuates that Martini helps to control the agenda. Go reread this. You can find this one fully in English, printed not just in strange translations, but on I'm forgetting exactly where it is. Major websites, unlike the other ones. Now also Scalfari, who's a close friend of Francis's, 10 years or so older, but a close friend, a socialist, an atheist, and they're very fond of each other. They're making jokes back and forth because they talk to each other so frequently. I'll read you later in a remark that expresses how frequently these guys talk on the phone. So they know each other really well. If Patrick Coffin interviewed me, you'd see us having lots of inside jokes. I saw more of the inside jokes between Scalfari and Pope Francis when I reread today and picked apart the first of their interviews. Get this. Scalfari says, why the name Francis? And Pope Francis says, well, for St. Francis. And he goes through Francis's mendicant spirituality and a whole bunch of things. And Scalfari says this, after you, no one else will choose the name Francis, will they? This is 6 months in. Parish Orphans and Retrogrades. This is 6 months into this wild, strange ride, and it wasn't that wild or that strange yet, except from an insider's perspective. And Francis said, well, let's not speculate. He didn't want to go there. But Scalfari said, no one before you picked Francis, and Francis is like, yeah, I'm Francis the First. But no one after you is going to choose the name Francis, are they? Because of what Francis is going to do. He's going to change the church. Give me 4 years or 5 years, and I'll change the church, is the by now infamous slogan of Francis. Let's not speculate. That is an inside joke between friends that Scalfari bothered to publish, the tip of the spear, a little bit of the joke. Just a little bit of the joke. After no one's going to choose Francis. That is not a normal thing to say. For each one of the Pope, hey, Pope Pius, there are 12 of them, right? Hopefully someday we'll see the 13th. And no one joked to Pope Pius the First, hey, no one's going to call themselves Pius, are they? There's never going to be a Pio Nono, Pius the Ninth. They're just like, hey, Pius, that's a cool name. No one ever assumed that he would be the only one. This carries great weight. You got to use your thinking brain. Okay, so Martini's a mention that I didn't catch at the time. The relativism everyone caught. Martini's a mention that everyone caught with this first interview. This little joke about there will be no more Francises. That's big. And then when they're getting up to leave, this gives it a real narrative flavor, the way that Scalfari does these interviews. He says, then he got himself a drink of water, but he wouldn't finish his. I finished my water. And we're getting up to leave. I said, don't walk me out. And the Pope says, and he waved it off, and he walked me out anyway. And he says, as he was opening the door, he says, next time we'll talk about women in the church. The church is female for a reason, and I'll show you why next time. Boom. Didn't see that. Didn't see that then. And he says, we'll also talk about that great soul, Pascal. And then they just give a wave. And they're talking often. They're buddies. That's interview number 1 from October 2013. Next interview is July of 2014. And I'm calling them interviews here, but I should have a little disclaimer. We don't know. They're interviewing by phone far more often than once a year or twice a year. But what I'm calling an interview is just any new period where Scalfari releases something that makes big waves. July 2014 is another red letter date. He releases something that made minor waves. I was having a hard time remembering or researching what the minor wave was, but they never go more than 8 months without a published Scalfari release. Given what I just said about interviews, asterisk. A lot of them are kind of rehashings, strategic rehashings parish orphans and retrogrades, of something Francis had said behind this wall, borderline paywall, of Eugenio Scalfari. Some of them are rehashings. Other of them are fresh interviews altogether. It's not really broken down or laid out for us. Okay. July 2014 is the second one. So this is 9 months later, 8.5 months later. Now we get just 3 months after that, October the 14th, 2014. What is this? It's a strategic release behind the semi-paywall named Eugenio Scalfari of a second endorsement or a recapitulation of the Francis idea from the first interview that truth is relative. And this is at the beginning of the Extraordinary Synod of October 2014 on the family, back when 1 Peter 5 really was getting going. I think they might have gotten going because of this third Scalfari release. And I think they were going a little bit before. They might have gotten going after July 2014, the second one. But after the third one in October, this is like the first week or the week right before the Extraordinary Synod. Wacky things were happening at the Synod. A lot of people, the majority of Catholics, even on the right, were still skeptical that there was anything to be skeptical about with Francis. But we got the midterm relatio, the report of what they were doing. They had all these affirmative statements on homosexual relations. We need to see the positive elements there. That happened at the Synod itself. And of course, we got this push that Cardinal Casper, who wanted to give communion to the divorced and civilly remarried, was holding sway in these Synod meetings. And the Africans were mobilizing to oppose Cardinal Casper. Remember, you had the racist remark by Cardinal Casper, who said something horrible. He said, they're just the Africans. They can't oppose me, or something like that. Something similar to that. He wrote them off because of their Africanity, right? That's crazy. And of course, he gets a pass because he's the big lefty trying to give communion to the civilly divorced and remarried. But it's also a recapitulation of truth being relative. See how Francis gives a cue, hey, release something now, presumably. October 2014. Note all the October surprises. First one was October 2013. Second one was July 2014. Third one was October 14th, 2014, the day after Fatima, Miracle of the Sunday. Francis says truth is relative, and it's released to create waves. There are some other things that created waves, I think, related to the Synod at the beginning of the Synod. See how he does this? He says something big that jolts Christendom, particularly Catholics, with plausible deniability. So then you see it kind of shake out. The shocking statement loses its force because you get a bunch of people saying, well, the Vatican weakly denied the force of the worst aspects of the comments, but they didn't ever precisely in any of these 10 interviews come out and say that's 100% wrong. Pope Francis holds the opposite point of view. They always just say, oh, Scalfari, what they consistently say from Secretary of Vatican Relations to Secretary of Vatican Relations, who are being churned through here. They're upseating one another. What they consistently say is, look, that's not perfectly accurate. What they'll even say that's kind of affirmative of what Scalfari reports is, well, he's just doing his best to repeat what he heard there. And then they'll just say he doesn't take notes or shorthand or record. That's not a denial. So this third one is from, of course, October 2014. Placed strategically, probably a call from Francis. Go ahead and release this aspect now. That's my guess. The fourth Francis Scalfari interview. Why would you do, by the way, before I go into the fourth, which is in March of 2015, never more than 8 or 9 months in between these, why would you keep doing interviews with someone that's mischaracterizing you? Think of what Ross Douthat said. You wouldn't. It's that simple. If you were being mischaracterized, you stop going to that journalistic outfit. That's a matter of fact. That's a matter of fact as it meets human behavior. So this is the way Francis wants it. He's making a mess via Eugenio Scalfari. And this mess, what he intended to do, was more to push the faithful Catholics or the zealous Catholics that are too impetuous, too myopic, too short-sighted off the boat. They do love the Lord and the sacraments, but these are the people that could be easily shaken from the boat. They're on the furthest right. This is the mess he's intended to make. That's at least phase one of the plan, and it's worked well. So the fourth interview is March of 2015. It's entitled something out of the mouth of Eugenio Scalfari, like what Francis can say to all of non-believing Europe. It's now it's not exactly clear, and I was doing some Italian translations. This is one of the first mentions that Francis will make to Scalfari, according to Scalfari, about hell being non-existent, about eliminationism, right? You know, the souls of the damned just evaporate. Has implications for purgatory and heaven too. But there will be many of these. What he says here strongly implies that hell is not a real place. And he'll return to this theme, Scalfari, as a proxy for Francis many times over the next interview. So that's March of 2015. Note the pattern. Then we jump 6 months forward into, you guessed it, October 2015. What took place in October 2015? The Ordinary Synod on the Family. I was watching at the edge of my seat, caught a lot of these, big obvious details, missed some of the ones because with some of these little clues into the man Pope Francis, you can only connect the dots afterwards. So the fifth, already, he'd been Pope for 2.5 years. And the fifth interview, or whatever you want to call it, the fifth release by Scalfari was October 2015. And here, this is the key moment. Are you listening? Are you watching Parish Orphans and Retrogrades? This is the tell. This is the Rosetta Stone. This is the Rosetta Stone for understanding that this is not just speculation I'm engaged in with regard to the way Francis has used Scalfari. The Scalfari message, the main shocking outrage from this release, the fifth one in October 2015, just as the Ordinary Synod on the Family was getting started, really to a synod whose purpose was to get communion in the hands of the divorced and civilly remarried. The first agenda item, according to Cardinal Brandmuller, of Francis and Martini, who he's also mentioning in one or more of these interviews with Scalfari. The actual outrage bespoken by Scalfari is that the Eucharist will be distributed to whatever divorcees ask for it. So it's on point. October 2014, the Extraordinary Synod, the goal is the Casperite goal of getting communion to the divorced and civilly remarried. And they did a release then saying truth is relative. Remember, even in Amoris Laetitia, which will be released a little bit after October 2015, 6 months later in April of 2016, remember, the logic of heaven cannot punish sinners for all of eternity. That's in the freaking document. And you still have Pope-splaining happening even today in late 2021. He gave communion to the civilly divorced and remarried, saying basically truth is relative. He gave it to them in the post-synodal apostolic exhortation. People, wake up. Here's the trick. Here's the tell. After this fifth release by Scalfari, where Scalfari said that Pope Francis said that he was going to give Eucharist to all divorcees who asked for it, what did the Vatican do? You guessed it. They released it and then retracted the statement in this half psyopy vague way. Nah, he didn't exactly say that. Just like they will do for hell, just like they will do for Jesus as God, just like they did for relativism, just like they did for women in the church, just like they will do for purgatory. So now we know, we have the luxury of history. It's like what I always say about reading the Anti-Federalist papers. Well, we can tell now the Anti-Federalists were right and the Federalists weren't right in the constitutional debates, because we see that Brutus, the Anti-Federalist, called it exactly right. That's exactly how they grew government the Lincolnians in the United States. Huge. Now, because of letter number 5, not the sexiest, not the worst theological point that Pope Francis made by proxy through Scalfari, but the most important because it's the Rosetta Stone. Eucharist will be given to all divorcees who ask for it. Nope, part retraction by his mouthpiece the next day or the day after that. And the whole synod was on that. He told it to Scalfari. 6 months later, he codified it in Amoris Laetitia, the post-synodal apostolic exhortation. And it's real. So this proves the method. This proves the method. You see? Do you see what I'm talking about? You guys have forgotten how bad Pope Francis is. I'm the moderate one, right? I'm the one saying, look, the Vatican II documents prove a lot of this stuff was going on with Vatican II too, at the actual event, the site, like the event of the council. Bad stuff was happening, but the documents are pretty good. When you look at them, you see that. I'm studying them. I'm writing a book right now on it. I was shocked how good they are. Francis's comments, Francis's history is not that way. It is different. Trust me, it's different. It gets worse when you look at it, okay? And this is the Rosetta Stone, the 5th Scalfari release at the time of the Ordinary Synod, October 2015. All right, the 6th one is, okay, I guess technically by Steve Skojic's count on 1 Peter 5, whom I thank for doing this great work, was actually 13 months later. So this is, I think, the largest gap. I said the largest gap was 8 or 9 months. It's 13 months later. We jump for the 6th Scalfari release/interview to November 2016. This is where he released a few outrages. He said, through proxy Scalfari, I still think it's valid, communists think like Christians. That pissed everybody off. It pissed me off. It's wrong. Pope Francis's mentor was a communist professor. This was released after the election. Pope Francis also talked a whole bunch of hot nonsense, hot garbage about refugees, insinuated against the new president-elect named Donald J. Trump. And he repeats that the greatest evil in the world, hard brackets, is not relativism, but is, end hard brackets, inequality. More Marxist cage rattling, even though he's not quite a Marxist. He was kind of a Peronist, which is sort of the Latin American opposite, even though there's not much understanding of scope of government there. So he seems to just be taking shots at Donald J. Trump in November 2016. Then we jump forward 8 months to July of 2017 for Scalfari interview/release number 7. And he says this, in a millennium or so, souls will be extinguished and these souls will merge with God. Okay, and whatever tepid, perfunctory retraction is exercised by the Vatican is, we already know they're fake retractions. They're testing the waters, and more than even testing the waters, they're desensitizing the listener to things he really does believe. Intended to scandalize the right-wingers in the church, and it's working right now on people I consider friends. They're falling off the right side of the boat. In a millennium, souls will be extinguished. Souls will merge with God. That's from the 7th. Who's ever heard of a pope that says this? I will take John the 12th, Pope John the 12th, who dies in the arms of a paramour. He never said anything like this. And yes, it's not formal heresy. He's not teaching it. Now, Amoris Laetitia is a whole other show. Lower ordinary papal magisterium, that's a whole other show. That's a complex tangle. But he's not teaching formal heresy on these matters. He's doing, in some ways, worse. In some ways, that's not as bad, but in some ways, it's worse. He's scandalizing people because it's not formal heresy, because then arguably he might depope himself. That's a whole other ecclesial battle, ecclesial debate, whether he can depope himself. I'm not getting into that. I'm saying his trick is to outsmart ecclesiology as it existed for 2 millennia. There was never before in the history of the world the ability of a pope to communicate with all the world in a heartbeat, the way I just did. Go live right now. They didn't have television. They didn't have Twitter. They didn't have Facebook. They didn't have Eugenio Scalfari. And morons are always saying, oh, the world is different now fundamentally. It's not. Human nature is the same and the world is mostly the same as it ever was. But the communications media is very different. It's the one thing that's really different. The plane's a little bit different than a boat. You can get someplace faster. That's not that different, though. Communications media travels at the speed of sound, or whatever Michael Scott says in that commercial for Dunder Mifflin. Right? This is the one thing that's really different. And he's taking advantage of the fact that the ordinary magisterium has not yet treated of the distinction between teaching and saying by popes, and the fact that if one's really wicked, he can slip right between teachings and sayings and scandalize a whole bunch of people. This will have to be treated at some later council. Francis will have to be treated by some later council. But he's smart. He's staying a step ahead of the curve. He's not staying behind what the magisterium teaches on the difference between teaching and saying for a pope. This is how you think like Saul Alinsky. Pope Francis is the Saul Alinsky of popes. He's playing within the rules to kick people outside of the bounds. Say it with me. Pope Francis is playing within the technical ecclesiological rules to kick otherwise good people outside of the bounds. It's not what the rad trads say. It's not, according to me, even what some of the good trads say or the post trads say. Who cares if it's formal heresy? This is what he's doing. His attack is now. That's what he's used Eugenio Scalfari, 97-year-old atheist who's clearly more fond of than all of us. He is so fond of this guy. You should read that first interview. You get a good sense. They were buddies then, and they've known each other 8.5 years longer now. Okay, the 8th one. He repeats some. This is March of 2018. About 9 months later, 8 to 9 months later, he repeats some verbiage about hell being non-existent. Some insinuations there. See how I'm not even going through? It doesn't even matter exactly what he said. He's speaking by proxy through this psyop named Eugenio Scalfari. And he says there's honor in being called a revolutionary. Now we're putting some meat on the bones of that first interview. October 2013 is the first interview. We're talking March 2018. We are now 4.5 years later. And now he's like, yeah, I'm called a revolutionary. He might be saying it abstractly, but he means him. Yeah, this is why no one's going to call themselves Francis after me. This pontificate has been a catastrophe for all who care about the faith. This is why I'm the relativist pope. This is why I'm the pope of the making of the kingmaker Cardinal Martini, the kingmaker Gottfried de Niels. I am the Sankt Gallen Pope. And we're just learning what that means. In between the last few releases, by the way, by Scalfari, was when de Niels got so cocky that he released what he said in a biography about the Sankt Gallen Mafia. That's what we call in law an admission by a party opponent. Strong evidentiary claim. There is honor in being called revolutionary. So now that stuff from the first or second or third interview starts to make more sense. Now they're winking and nodding at each other. And they always talk about embracing each other, even over the phone. They're like, can I give you a phone hug? You know, whatever, dude. But they're really good friends. He really likes Eugenio Scalfari. And a lot more than he likes me. A lot more than he likes Church Militant. The 9th release by Scalfari is, again, October 2019. What takes place in October 2019, Steph? Yet another synod. The Pachamama Synod. The Shamazon Synod. This is what was happening right as I was leaving Taylor Marshall's channel on TNT. And so he always has a release for these October synods, an October surprise. And whoever has multiple meetings with Francis, says Scalfari, knows for a fact that he regards Jesus of Nazareth as a man, not God, while he's alive, between his birth and his crucifixion. He says, whoever has multiple meetings with him. So he's like, I'm not talking about, he's referenced it a few different times throughout these meetings and releases. Pope Francis thinks Jesus was a man, not God, while he was alive. And he says anyone that has multiple meetings with him knows this. That's a strong claim, and it's a believable claim. So it's a repeated theme that comes up time and time again. There seems to be, here, I couldn't go through it all because I was rushing. I think there's another insinuation about hell not being real. Who really cares whether he repeated it 4 times or 5 times about hell being fake? Who really cares whether he repeated 2 times or 3 times that Jesus was not God while he was alive? This is a crisis. The house is burning down. Well, it's not formal heresy. Well, what do I care? Yeah, that's less interesting. The Pope can't speak formal heresy. He ceases to be Pope. That would be like him giving up power. He's not going to do that. But he can say this stuff behind the scenes through a proxy, on a plane presser, on Twitter, at Wednesday audiences when he keeps repeating what else? Not through Scalfari, but at Wednesday audience, what does he repeat? Jesus didn't do miracles. The resurrection was a miracle. Maybe he doesn't even believe in that. Well, he at least said Jesus wasn't a man until after the resurrection. Wasn't a God until after the resurrection. That was October 2019. Another October synod release. Remember, if these are just being released randomly by Scalfari, I mean, he's a smart guy, this old 97-year-old wretch, atheist, socialist wretch, then yeah, he might know what to do, but he's clearly getting instruction. Release these as the synod's release. It's a great big psyop. We're going to confuse the hell out of some people. We're going to scare the hell into others, but mainly we're going to push the faithful radtrads off the bark. And look, it's working. Look at what I covered the last 3 or 4 shows. It's working. And I don't want that. I care about these people. This is wild. Remember, Ross Douthat of New York Times, who's known as kind of center-right, he says this is clearly backdoor information dissemination. It's just standard. The CIA would do this. Mixture of truth, misinformation, and disinformation. And the heftiest, sexiest aspects of this are, I think, true. Then in August of 2020, he releases through Scalfari some nonsense, some coffee clatch about the cry of the earth and the environment and garbage like that.
Song of the Whales.
The Song of the Whales. Who cares? Here's what he said in 2016, though. So that's the 10 that we know of. Here's what he said in 2016, though, in November. I am honored to receive frequent phone calls from Francis, and we haven't met in person for over a year, meaning they typically, I think, by his expectation, do meet at least once a year. So I was very pleased to receive his invitation to speak after the election in 2016, which was the 6th by my count. There have been so many, as Steve Skojec points out. These guys are buddies. They're buddy-roos. They're intimate. There have been so many meetings that no one can even know how many. And Scalfari does not release all of the interviews the way he released as an entire set piece. The first one in October of 2013. October 2013, October 2014, October 2015. It was early November 2016. October 2019, and then August 2020. I'm honored to receive frequent phone calls from Francis. We have not met in person for more than a year, so I was very pleased to receive his invitation. No one after Francis will call themselves as Pope Francis, according to Eugenio Scalfari. This guy not even in the faith who seems to know so much more than we do about what's really going on with our Pope. Well, here's my takeaway point, friends, parish orphans. Everyone's forgotten about Francis. You think we've been talking so much about Francis, over-covering him? We haven't. Particularly the Retrogrades. They've been undercovering him. All this Francis criticism, they've shot toward Vatican II, and it's confused the whole thing, and it's made the whole thing schismatic or quasi-schismatic. Francis is the key. And go back, and everyone do this now. Reread Francis's October 2013 first full interview with Scalfari. Look for the relativism, look for Martini reference, look for women of the church, look for the no one's going to call themselves Francis. There's a few other things, but I had to keep this video short. I got to go teach Latin class. I'm telling you, friends, Francis is the key, okay? He's the key to getting rid of the Retrogrades, people that are otherwise faithful. So blame him first, even if he's not a formal heretic, especially if he's not a formal heretic. Stay faithful, stay on the bark, don't go anywhere. Don't give in to Francis.